Hello everyone and welcome to today's video or live stream. This is going to be covering chapter 16, which is called New Nationalism, and it will cover the presidential administrations of McKinley, Teddy, and Taft from 1897 until 1913. And this is the 16th chapter of our compendium. There's 26 chapters total, so after this there's going to be 10 chapters left. And this chapter in particular is divided into three sections. So the first section is called New Exceptionalism, which will cover the McKinley administration. The second section is called Square Deal, which is going to be the Teddy Roosevelt administration. And then the third section is called New Justice, which will cover the Taft administration. And each section has its own timeline, interactive timeline, that you can go through and look through the Prime Minister's documents, but also events that we've added so far. If there are any documents or events that you know about that you don't see on the timeline, please let me know, and I'll be more than happy to add it to the timeline. And so, yeah, let's get right into it. So, New Exceptionalism. William McKinley's presidency oversaw the United States' emergence as a world power, most dramatically through the Spanish-American War, which resulted in the acquisition of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, as well as U.S. involvement in the Boxer Rebellion in China. Domestically, the nation experienced rapid industrialization, continued labor unrest, including strikes and union activity, and race tensions exemplified by riots and violent episodes in multiple cities, highlighting the fragility of social cohesion in a transforming society. The Gold Standard Act of 1900 stabilized currency debates, while cultural and technological developments, including the World's Columbian Expo and advances in communication and transportation, reflected America's growing influence and modernity. Debates over empire, race, and national identity intensified as the Philippines insurrection unfolded, and overseas expansion raised questions about citizenship and governance. McKinley's assassination in 1901 abruptly ended his presidency, paving the way for Theodore Roosevelt and a more assertive, progressive phase of American domestic and foreign policy. So we have McKinley's inaugural address. That's the first document that we have on this section. McKinley's special message on tariff reform. So at this time, tariff rates are exceptionally high. Like, people nowadays are talking about tariffs of like 10 to 20%. It was like 50%. It was very high during this time. Appoints Teddy Roosevelt as Assistant Secretary of the Navy. So, no, Teddy Roosevelt was not McKinley's vice president for McKinley's first term. Teddy Roosevelt will be the vice president for McKinley's second term, which McKinley will die at the start of. Yeah, McKinley's proposal sending aid to Cuba. So this is leading up to the Spanish-American War. Yeah, the Constitution of Delaware, the current one. You have Excelsior arrives in San Francisco with $500,000 in gold from Alaska. The steamship Excelsior arrives in San Francisco from Alaska, carrying gold value at $500,000. The gold-starved nation rushes to the Yukon. So, gold rush is happening again. There's multiple gold rushes in American history. The most famous is the California Gold Rush. You have the Dingley Tariff Act, raising customs and duties on an average of 49% over the levels of the 1890 McKinley Tariff. So very much very high tariff rates at this time. McKinley's State of the Union Address. New York Journal stokes hostilities. So the New York Journal publishes a letter insulting President McKinley, written by a Spanish minister to the United States, Senior Don Enrique Dupuy de Lome. This is part of Hearst's attempts at starting a war with Spain. On February 15th, 1898, the USS Maine sinks. 266 officers and sailors died. Yellow journalists blame the Maine on Spain. The incident was an internal accident on board, as the proper or the actual cause would be revealed later after the war. Congress appropriates $50 million for use at the discretion of McKinley for national defense. So this is one of many instances of Congress just handing a blank check. Well, not completely a blank check. It's a $50 million check, which is a lot of money at this time. That's like probably $250 million in today's money, and for national defense. A report from the U.S. Naval Court of Inquiry about the USS Maine. The conclusion states that the USS Maine hit a submarine. A separate Spanish report states that an onboard explosion sunk the Maine. So even the government is lying about the cause of the USS Maine sinking. McKinley will give an address about the report. During this time, you also have a pretty interesting Supreme Court decision about citizenship with the U.S. v. Wong Kim Ark. And I have a video by Mr. Beat, so you can check out his channel and subscribe if you like his content. He made a bunch of videos about almost 100 Supreme Court decisions. If the U.S. ambassador to Spain sends a message to Spain that the U.S. wants an armistice and peace with Cuba, Spain rejects the armistice. McKinley delivers a war message to Congress. You have the Teller Resolution recognizing independence of Cuba from Spain and demanding that Spain relinquish its authority and government to the island of Cuba and withdraw its land and naval forces. Spain ends diplomatic relations with the United States. The U.S. will blockade Cuba. Put into effect the Teller Resolution. There is an act creating a volunteer army, which Teddy Roosevelt will be a part of with his Rough Riders. Calls for 125,000 volunteers to serve in the army. Spain declares war on the United States. Commodore George Dewey leads the naval Asiatic squadron from ports of Hong Kong to the Philippine Islands to attack the Spanish fleet. And then the U.S. will declare war on Spain. You have the Battle of Manila Bay. Commodore George Dewey leads the United States to early victory over the Spanish Navy in the Battle of Manila Bay. Philippines and Spanish Pacific Fleet fall. 7 Spanish vessels sink with 0 American losses. Teddy Roosevelt volunteers to fight in a volunteer cavalry regiment called the Rough Riders. McKinley will call forth 75,000 more volunteers. You have the Trans-Mississippi International Expo, inspired by the World Fair, Columbian Fair, or Expo, that happened just a couple years in the early 1890s. An act to remove the disability imposed by Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Marines land at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. The War Revenue Act. U.S. captures Guam in the Pacific. Battle of San Juan Hill. I think Teddy Roosevelt participated in that battle. Battle of Santiago de Cuba. Hawaii is fully annexed. U.S. captures... it's annexed as a territory. It's not yet a state. That won't be until much later. U.S. captures Santiago de Cuba. U.S. invades Spanish Puerto Rico. Armistice is proclaimed. Signing with Spain. request of an investigation on the Department of War. So the Secretary of War, Russell Algier, has formally requested President McKinley to order an investigation into charges of that the Department of War mismanaged volunteer army camps in a number of states. McKinley addresses the Dodge Commission, or Dodge, yeah, I think it's Dodge, addresses members of the Dodge Commission investigating the War Department's practices, mismanagement of typhoid epidemics, spoiled rations, and logistical and transportation-related disorganization in volunteer army camps during war with Spain is to be scrutinized. Delivers remarks at the Trans-Mississippi and International Expo, talking about unity and progress. U.S. begins occupation in Puerto Rico. You have the Phoenix race riot. A group of local Democrats attempted to stop a Republican election official from taking the affidavits of African Americans who had been denied the right to vote. A brawl broke out. J.I. Etheridge, a local Democratic leader, was shot dead. Thomas Tolbert, one of the Republican election officials, was also shot but survived. In the following days, about 1,000 Democrats showed up, burned Tolbert's house, and lynched about a dozen black men. The local white Republicans were exiled. Wilmington race riot also happened. A violent attack by a white mob on the officers of a black-owned newspaper in Wilmington, North Carolina, was followed by the forced ouster of that's supposed to be ousting, not ouster, of the city government. This resulted in many deaths, estimated between 60 to 260. You have McKinley's 1898 State of the Union, Treaty of Paris of 1898, ending the Spanish-American War. Spain relinquishes its control over Cuba and formally cedes ownership of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the United States, broadening the United States' international obligations. McKinley's declaration on permanent occupation of the Philippines. Spanish forces leave Cuba. Emilio Aguinaldo leads independence for the Philippines. He was a revolutionary who fought the Spanish, but now he's fighting the U.S. occupation. You have the Battle of Manila between U.S. military and the recently proclaimed Philippine Republic. Treaty of Paris, 1898, is ratified and signed by McKinley. The Dodge Committee report is submitted to President McKinley about the mismanagement by the Department of War. You have the executive order exempting civil service examinations, issues executive order exempting thousands from civil service examinations and greater oversight over partisan-motivated removals, deviating from President Cleveland's strong civil service reform platform. Secretary of War resigns over management during the Spanish-American War. After the Dodge Commission's investigation into the mismanagement of the Spanish-American War, the President accepts the resignation of Secretary of War Russell Algier. We have the open door policy with China. Secretary of State John M. Hay releases the open door policy notes to Britain, France, Japan, and Russia to endorse international trade and open economic markets with China. In McKinley's 1899 State of the Union address, we have a treaty in Washington, D.C. between Britain and the United States, which will be revising the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty of 1850, approving of a jointly occupied neutral Isthmian canal connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. The canal was a major interest of President McKinley, and this will become the Panama Canal. McKinley meets with the Women's Christian Temperance Union meets with the representatives of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, who tell him of their concerns about army canteens selling alcoholic beverages. The Gold Standard Act establishes gold as the primary standard for redeeming paper money. Now that you have an influx of more gold from Alaska and the Yukon, you have McKinley. He appoints a second Philippine Commission to establish a civil government. And the future president, William Howard Taft, is its chair on the commission. The territorial government of Hawaii is created April of 1900. U.S. enters the Boxer Rebellion. U.S. troops enter Peking together with troops from European powers without congressional approval to quell the Boxer Rebellion. In this uprising, Chinese nationalists had massacred foreigners. The rebellion poses a threat to Secretary Hayes' open door policy, thus leading to U.S. intervention. The RNC will nominate the McKinley for president and Teddy Roosevelt for vice president, and I have the link to the Republican Party platform. You have the second open door policy. Secretary of State John Hay releases his second open door policy note addressing the United States' interest in preserving a united China as it experiences civil war and unrest and foreign intervention in the Boxer Rebellion. You have the election of McKinley. Here's a video by Mr. Beat. McKinley wins re-election, and Teddy wins as VP. Yeah, McKinley's 1900 State of the Union. You have the Platt Amendment, which signs an Army Appropriation Act of 1901, granting the U.S. sweeping control over Cuba's domestic and foreign affairs. You have McKinley's second inaugural address. End of the Philippine Rebellion. Filipino revolutionary and leader proclaims the end of the rebellion in the Philippines. And now you have the Pan American Expo in Buffalo, New York. This is the same place that McKinley will be shot at. So this is the World's Fair to celebrate the economic power, technological innovation, growing international influence of the United States and the Western Hemisphere at the dawn of the 20th century. Its most striking feature was the massive electric tower, illuminated by millions of lights, powered by nearby Niagara Falls, symbolizing the promise of electricity and modern industry. The expo showcased advances in engineering, transportation, agriculture, and imperial ambition following the Spanish-American War. Its legacy was permanently marked by tragedy when President McKinley was assassinated there on September 6, 1901, leading to the ascension of Teddy Roosevelt to the presidency. During this time, you have the Insular cases about U.S. citizenship and voting. McKinley remarks about not running for a third term. McKinley's final speech that he gave at the expo. This is the Pan American Expo in Buffalo. And then that's when he gets shot on September 6, 1901. And then McKinley dies on September 14th, 1901. So this will conclude this section, which covers the McKinley administration. If you go down here to this next section, section 2, it's called Square Deal, 1901 to 1909. And this covers the Teddy Roosevelt administration. So Theodore Roosevelt transformed the federal government into a proactive force for reform, regulation, and national oversight. Roosevelt's administration became synonymous with trust busting, breaking up monopolies like Northern Securities, and advocating for regulation of big business, while public exposure by journalists such as Ida Tarbell's History of Standard Oil and Upton Sinclair's the jungle fueled reform movements in labor, health, and food safety, ultimately leading to the creation of the Food and Drug Administration. The Panic of 1907 tested the nation's financial system, prompting Roosevelt to support reforms that strengthened banking oversight. Beyond politics, technological and cultural milestones marked the era, including the Wright brothers' first flight and the rapid growth of industry, urbanization, and mass media. Roosevelt's bold approach reshaped the expectations of the presidency, blending progressive reform, conservation, and global engagement into the model of a modern executive. So, Roosevelt is very much the first modern U.S. president. So Roosevelt gives an address about McKinley's death on the same day that McKinley dies. You have a massacre that happens in the Philippines of U.S. soldiers by the former revolutionaries. Within the first month of Teddy Roosevelt's administration, he will dine with Booker T. Washington, which was a controversial act. So the Washington Times reacts to Teddy Roosevelt dining with a black man, Booker T. Washington, and the Southerners are upset by what is said to be an intended insult to the South and as a threat of social equality. A treaty with Great Britain is signed about the Panama Canal. What would become the Panama Canal. The Constitution of Alabama. You have Roosevelt's 1901 State of the Union address. You have the first book of a trilogy by Thomas Dixon, and this is the series that's going to include the Klansmen, which will incite the second emergence of the KKK. So the Ku Klux Klan will become popularized by Thomas Dixon in his writings. And so in this book, The Leopard's Spots is a romance of the white man's burden from the end of Civil War until 1900. It was the first novel of Thomas Dixon's Reconstruction trilogy and was followed by The Klansman, a historical romance of the KKK, 1905, and The Traitor, a story of the fall of the Invisible Empire, 1907. In the novel, published in 1902, Dixon offers an account on Reconstruction in which he portrays a Reconstruction leader and former slave driver, Northern carpetbaggers, and emancipated slaves as the villains, while the Ku Klux Klan members are anti-heroes. You have the extension of the Chinese Exclusion Act, an act to prohibit the coming into and to regulate the residents within the United States, its territories, and all territory under its jurisdiction, and the District of Columbia of Chinese persons of Chinese descent. You have the Pennsylvania coal miners' strike of 1902. You have the Isthmian Canal Act, which will fund the new Panama Canal Company. The Philippine Organic Act to prepare it for becoming a territory. You have the Coal Industry Conference. Roosevelt convenes a conference in Washington, D.C. Roosevelt stated that he had no authority to intervene in the strike, but regarded the situation as intolerable. This is the first time a president has intervened in an industrial dispute. At least in this way. There was a time under Cleveland, but he was just sending National Guard to break up a strike. You have Teddy Roosevelt's 1902 State of the Union address, an act to promote the efficiency of the militia. The act provides that in case of invasion of the U.S. or danger of invasion from any foreign nation, or of rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States. If the president cannot execute the laws with other forces at his command, he may call forth the militia to suppress the invasion or rebellion. You have the Department of Commerce and Labor established. This department received forces from the Treasury, this department received offices from the Treasury, lighthouses, steamboat inspection service, Bureau of Navigation, National Bureau of Standards, Coast and Geodetic Survey, Commissioner General of Immigration, Bureau of Statistics, from the Department of the Interior, the Census Office, the Fish Commission, from State Department, the Bureau of Foreign Commerce, new Bureau of Manufacturers. So Teddy Roosevelt creates a lot of the bureaucratic state. A lot of people like to look at Wilson as being the first, but I think Teddy Roosevelt was really the first of the bureaucratic presidents. You have a Supreme Court decision, Champion v. Ames. Decision of the Supreme Court to transport of lottery tickets is commerce, and federal regulation of interstate commerce includes the power to prohibit commerce. And so this is one of many Supreme Court decisions which expanded the power of Congress to regulate commerce, far beyond what I think the Constitution allows. Teddy's speaking tour, which will cover at least 135 occasions, and that's a very short time period. You have the Platt Amendment, warships to Panama. Panama declares independence from Colombia, and so Teddy Roosevelt orders warships to Panama to maintain free and uninterrupted transit across the isthmus. USA recognizes Panama's independence. Treaty with Panama to build the Panama Canal. Teddy Roosevelt's 1903 State of the Union. In December of 1903, you have the Wright brothers' first flight, which lasted 12 seconds and covered 120 feet. You have the History of the Standard Oil Company by Ida Tarbell, a groundbreaking investigative expose detailing the monopolistic practices and ruthless tactics of John D. Rockefeller's oil empire. The work helped fuel public outrage, shaped the progressive reform movement, and contributed to the eventual breakup of Standard Oil under antitrust laws. You have a Supreme Court case, Gonzales v. Williams. Russo-Japanese War begins in 1904. Proclamation of neutrality in the Russian-Japanese War. Northern Securities Co. v. United States. Supreme Court orders the dissolution of the Northern Securities Company as an illegal combination in accordance with the Sherman Antitrust Act. So this is a major trust-busting case. You have Naval Construction Act. Republicans nominate Teddy Roosevelt for president for re-election. Or I guess his first election, because he wasn't elected president the first time, because McKinley died. You have the election of Roosevelt in 1904. His State of the Union. His 1904 State of the Union, where he announces a policy of possible intervention in hemispheric affairs. The Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine demands that U.S. citizens be accorded the rights when traveling without regard to their creed or race, without regard to whether they were born in the U.S. or abroad, calls for compulsory school attendance laws for the District of Columbia and for public playgrounds, suggests adopting corporal punishment to respond to brutality and cruelty toward the weak, in particular wife beaters. He also calls for severe child labor and factory inspection laws, recommends against married women working in factories. The prime duty of the man is to work, to be the breadwinner. The prime duty of the woman is to be the mother, the housewife. Praises the work of the Department of Agriculture in education of farmers and related research, points out that individual states are not in a position to deal with great corporations dealing with interstate commerce. This goal requires appropriate legislation, commends to Congress recommends to Congress the work of the Bureau of Corporations in examining possible corporate illegality. Then you have the infamous The Klansman by Thomas Dixon. The Klansman, a historical romance of the KKK, is a novel published in 1905, the second work in the Ku Klux Klan trilogy by Thomas Dixon Jr. The others are The Leopard's Spots and The Traitor, chronicling the American Civil War and Reconstruction era from a pro-Confederate perspective. It presents the Ku Klux Klan heroically. And I just want to make a statement about the KKK. So they're very inspired by the Scottish. There's a lot of Scottish imagery. The Confederate battle flag is just the Scottish flag. That cross, of course, different colors, but it's the same flag, essentially. And so they're wearing these outfits, which at first look like, Crusader outfits with the crosses. But one thing to note are these spikes. And what's interesting is, they're all white, and they have these spikes, and they're Scottish. What is Scottish, all white, with a single spike at the head? Well, it's the national animal of Scotland, which is a unicorn, an all-white horse with a single spike, or a horn, on the top of the head. So the KKK are Scottish furries dressing up as unicorns, running around burning crosses, and they don't really like black people all that much. So that's my theory of who the KKK are. They're actually Scottish furries. I thought that was just a fun little tidbit about the KKK, which there's not really that much fun about them. Let's see. Jacobson v. Massachusetts, a Supreme Court decision about forcing people to get vaccinated. So here's another video by Mr. Beat about that Supreme Court decision. Resolution to return Confederate battle flags to the states. So there's a lot of Confederate stuff going on, and it's not looking good. You have Teddy Roosevelt's second, or I guess this is his first inauguration, because again, he wasn't elected for his first term, because McKinley died. Teddy Roosevelt attends a wedding of FDR and Eleanor. So FDR and Eleanor get married in 1905. Teddy Roosevelt's speaking tour in Kentucky, Texas, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Oklahoma, Colorado, Nebraska, Illinois, and Iowa. You have the Lochner v. New York case, which the Supreme Court holds that state limitations on working hours are unconstitutional. The Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment protects the individual right to freedom of contract. Industrial Workers of the World Union established. You have the Niagara Conference of 1905. So W.E.B. Du Bois organized a conference of black leaders to begin the Niagara movement meant to combat Jim Crow and the accommodationists like Booker T. Washington. You have the Treaty of Portsmouth ended the Russo-Japanese War, which Teddy Roosevelt advocated for. You have Teddy's speaking tour, another one. And I have one of his speeches that he gave at the Tuskegee Institute. And so here's an image of Teddy speaking at the event, and he's standing right next to Booker T. Washington. You have Teddy Roosevelt's 1905 State of the Union. You have The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, about living conditions in factory towns. You have the Muckrack speech by Teddy Roosevelt, the wild preachers of unrest and discontent, the wild agitators against the entire existing order, the men who act crookedly, whether because of sinister design or from mere puzzle-headedness, the men who preach destruction without proposing any substitute for what they intend to destroy, or who propose a substitute which would be far worse than the existing evils. All these men are the most dangerous opponents of real reform. So he's talking about radical socialists who want to destroy the system without creating a clear plan as to what will replace capitalism. You have a San Francisco earthquake. A massive early morning quake is followed by a fire and the loss of hundreds of lives. You have the National Monuments Act of 1906, Enabling Act for Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Arizona, in preparation of turning them into states. You have the Hepburn Act of 1906, increase the power of the Interstate Commerce Commission to regulate railroad shipping rates and enforce regulations. In particular, the act was intended to reduce the bargaining power of large shippers. The commission was empowered to set rates that it determined were just and reasonable, rather than any kind of market set prices. The ICC was increased in size and members' salaries increased. Passage of the bill depended on popular outrage toward the railroads. With the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906, this prohibited the manufacturing and sale of poisonous foods, drugs, or medicines. You have the Brownsville Incident, a racially charged episode in Brownsville, Texas, on the night of August 13th to the 14th in 1906, in which a white bartender was killed and a police officer wounded by gunfire in the town. Local white residents immediately accused the all-black soldiers of the U.S. Army's 25th Infantry Regiment stationed at nearby Fort Brown, despite testimony from the soldiers' own white officers that every man was in his barracks and no shots came from their post. Niagara Movement's first public meeting, located at Storer College in Harper's Ferry, a symbolic location for this movement, as it was the site of John Brown's 1859 raid and the location of the only school in West Virginia that provided former slaves an education above the elementary level. The week was filled with many inspirational speeches, meetings, and special addresses and commemorative ceremonies. A highlight for those gathered was John Brown's Day. It was a day devoted to honoring the memory of John Brown. At 6 a.m., a silent pilgrimage began to John Brown's fort. The members removed their shoes and socks as they tread upon the hallowed ground where the fort stood. The assemblage then marched single file around the fort, singing the battle hymn of the Republic and John Brown's body. The inspirational morning was followed by an equally stirring afternoon, when Niagarites listened to Henrietta Larry Evans, whose brother and nephew fought alongside Brown at Harper's Ferry, then Lewis Douglas, son of Frederick Douglass, and finally Reverend C. Ransom, pastor of the Charles Street African Methodist Episcopal Church in Boston, who gave a stirring speech on John Brown. And during this conference, W.E.B. Du Bois will give an address to the country. The Niagara Conference concluded on Sunday, August 19th, with a reading of an address to the country, penned by W.E.B. Du Bois. We will not be satisfied to take one jot or title less than our full manhood rights. We claim for ourselves every single right that belongs to a free-born American, political, civil, and social. And until we get these rights, we will never cease to protest and assail the ears of America. The battle we wage is not for ourselves alone, but for all true Americans. During this time, you have the Atlanta Race Massacre in 1906. The riot erupted after sensationalized newspaper reports accused black men of assaulting four white women, igniting white mob violence against the city. Over several days, white attackers killed at least 25 African Americans, likely more, destroyed businesses, and terrorized black neighborhoods, while police and state authorities responded slowly and unevenly, and two white men died. The riot exposed the volatility of Jim Crow Atlanta, strengthened black political organizing and self-defense efforts, and marked a turning point in the city's racial and civic history. Japanese ambassador complains of ill treatment in schools. Japanese ambassador lodged a complaint about discrimination against Japanese children by the San Francisco School District. He argues that this discrimination is contrary to the terms of a 1894 treaty. Teddy Roosevelt discharges 167 black soldiers due to the Brownsville incident. So this is one of the bad stains on Teddy Roosevelt. He didn't listen to the testimony of the white officers or the black men who said that they did not participate in the Brownsville shooting, and so he fires or discharges almost 200 black soldiers. You have Teddy Roosevelt's visits the Panama Canal construction site. Teddy Roosevelt's 1906 State of the Union address includes a call for prohibiting corporate contributions to political campaigns. Ooh, I wonder if that's relevant today. And reforms to federal criminal law, observes that lynching represents by just so much a loosening of the bands of civilization that the spirit of lynching inevitably throws into prominence in the community all the foul and evil creatures who dwell therein. Immigrants we must treat with justice and goodwill, particularly singles out hostility to Japanese, putting out their gift to support recovery after the San Francisco earthquake. To shut Japanese children out from the public school is a wicked absurdity, urges congressional action, specifically providing for the naturalization of Japanese who come here intending to become American citizens. Teddy Roosevelt awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1906 for his role in ending the Russo-Japanese War, but he did not attend the ceremony in person, but telegraphed a statement which was read by an American envoy to Norway. Message to Congress on the Panama Canal construction. Message to Congress on the discharge of black soldiers from the Brownsville incident. You have the third and final book in the KKK trilogy called The Traitor by Thomas Dixon. An act prohibiting corporate contributions to political campaigns. Immigration Act of 1907. The 1907 recession begins when it comes to declining stock prices. You have the Panic of 1907. The panic erupted in October after a failed stock market corner attempt by speculators. You have the Oklahoma becomes a state. 1907 State of the Union address. Now the Great White Fleet circumnavigation of the globe. Grand Canyon declared a national monument. Mueller v. Oregon. Governor's Conference on the Conservation of Natural Resources. Child labor law for the District of Columbia. Aldrich-Verland Act appoints a National Conservation Commission. Republicans nominate Taft for president. William Jennings Bryan will give an address called An Ideal Republic. You have the Springfield Race Riot. Ford introduces the Model T automobile in 1908. Georgia amends its state constitution to exclude black men from voting. The Georgia Constitution required voters to be male, at least 21, and a resident of Georgia for 1 year, but did not explicitly disqualify black voters, because Smith's amendment would disenfranchise many whites also. It contained exemptions designed to allow whites to vote, even if they failed a literacy test. Among those exemptions, any Union or Confederate veteran or their descendants could vote. Because many white Georgians had grandfathers in the Confederate Army, this provision became known as the Grandfather Clause. Voters approved the amendment in 1908, and Georgia took another long step down the dark road of Jim Crow. So this amendment to the Georgia Constitution does not openly state that black men can't vote. What it does is it has a requirement, like a literacy test, in order for people to vote. However, if you had an ancestor who fought in the Civil War as a Union soldier or a Confederate soldier, then you were exempt from taking the test, the literacy test. So this is their way of attacking black voters without openly attacking black voters, because it's unconstitutional to directly attack black voters. So they attack everyone, but then give an exemption that really only applies to white voters. You have the election of Taft. He wins over William Jennings Bryan. Teddy Roosevelt's 1908 State of the Union address. Teddy Roosevelt's message to investigate the Pulitzer for libel. Asks for a congressional investigation of claims by a New York newspaper, The World, edited by Joseph Pulitzer, that there was corruption involved in acquiring French rights to the Panama Canal. Teddy Roosevelt's report on the Conservation Commission, and the NAACP founded in New York City by an interracial group of reformers, including W.E.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells Barnett, Mary White Ovington, Moorfield Story, and Oswald Garrison Villard, to fight racial discrimination through law and public advocacy. Its creation was directly inspired by the Springfield race riot, which exposed that violent racism was a national, not merely Southern problem. From its founding, the NAACP focused on challenging segregation, disenfranchisement, and lynching through the courts and the press, making it the nation's leading civil rights organization of the 20th century. And then the last event that I have on this timeline is Pulitzer indicted for criminal libel. Now we go into the third and final section of this chapter called New Justice, which covers the Taft administration from 1909 to 1913. So Taft's presidency carried forward many progressive-era reforms while emphasizing judicial process and legalism over Roosevelt's flamboyant activism. Taft pursued trust-busting more aggressively than his predecessor, targeting Standard Oil and other major corporations, and strengthened the Interstate Commerce Commission, while pushing for tariff reform that sparked political controversy. Conservation remained a federal priority, though Taft's approach alienated some progressives who preferred Roosevelt's more assertive vision. The administration also contended with mounting social tensions, labor unrest, and the ongoing evolution of the U.S. as a global economic power. By 1912, political divisions culminated in Roosevelt's Bull Moose candidacy, fracturing the Republican Party and setting the stage for the election of Wilson. You have Taft's 1909 inaugural address, Taft's address to Congress on revising the Dingley Tariff Act. So tariffs are a big thing at this time. Taft's address commemorating Gettysburg veterans. Taft's address to Congress proposing new income tax. Proposes a 2% net income tax on all corporations other than banks. The intention is to gain revenue lost by tariff reductions. Proposes a constitutional amendment for personal income tax collection. Congress proposes the 16th Amendment to the states. The 16th Amendment to the Constitution will give Congress the power to lay and collect taxes on incomes. Payne-Aldrich Tariff Act decreases tariff rates, but less than desired by progressives. Also creates Court of Customs Appeals and provides for a board of general appraisers. The law also includes authority to appoint such persons as may be required to assist him in the discharge of the duties imposed. This established the Tariff Board. Address to the Chamber of Commerce, primarily discussing banking reform and the effects of the tariff bill. Taft speaking tour, during which he gives this address on tariffs. Taft's 1909 State of the Union addresses the Republican Club of New York at the Lincoln Birthday Banquet. Citizenship in a Republic by Teddy Roosevelt. The Mann-Elkin Act expanded the scope of the Interstate Commerce Commission to incorporate regulation of interstate oil pipelines, telegraph, telephone, radio, and cable companies, and creates a Commerce Court to consider all cases relating to enforcement action of the Interstate Commerce Commission. The court was intended as a check on the ICC. You have the Johnson-Jeffries fight. The fight took place in Reno, Nevada, between heavyweight champion Jack Johnson and former undefeated champion James Jeffries, who returned from retirement amid national calls for a white challenger to reclaim the heavyweight title from Johnson during the height of the Jim Crow era. More than 20,000 spectators attended the match, while crowds across the United States gathered in theaters and halls to receive live telegraph reports, with newspapers framing the contest as a racial struggle as much as a sporting event. Johnson dominated the fight, and Jeffries' corner stopped the contest in the 15th round, after which racial violence and riots erupted in several American cities as white mobs attacked black citizens in response to Johnson's victory. So these are the Johnson-Jeffries riots over a boxing fight. Then in August of 1910, Teddy Roosevelt gives his New Nationalism speech, which is where I get the name for this chapter, New Nationalism, which is the second chapter of the Progressive Era. You have the National Urban League founded. Recollections of Alexander Stephens. Alexander Stephens is was the vice president of the Confederacy, and after the war, he will be arrested and imprisoned for about half a year. And during his time imprisoned, he will write a journal, this diary, and of his reflections on the cause of the Civil War. And this wasn't published until 1910, when the Lost Cause narrative became very popular because of works by Thomas Dixon, like The Klansman. And so this is a time where the KKK are being revived, and this is one of many documents which will encourage the reemergence of the KKK. and the lost cause narrative. In the midterm election, the Republican Party went from a 65 majority in the Senate to 54%. In the House, the Republicans suffered a major defeat, going from 56% majority to a 41% minority. Taft's 1910 State of the Union. White swears in as Chief Justice. You have the infamous Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in Manhattan, New York, kills 146 workers. The fire highlights the absence of workplace safety regulations. There was only one fire escape, which was locked, trapping the workers, and the doors were locked by the factory managers to prevent workers from sneaking out during work hours. Now, the Standard Oil Company of New Jersey v. New York, or v. United States. The Supreme Court rules in favor of the dissolution of the Standard Oil Company, having violated the Sherman Antitrust Act and restricted interstate trade. However, they specified that only unreasonable contracts in restraint of trade were prohibited. So this will break up the Standard Oil Company. Taft's 1911 State of the Union address, admission of New Mexico. Teddy Roosevelt says he will run for president. This would be his third term, non-consecutive. You have the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. RNC nominates Taft. Teddy Roosevelt is nominated as an independent. And Teddy Roosevelt will accept the Progressive Party nomination, which will become known as the Bull Moose Party. Teddy Roosevelt is shot on October 14th, 1912, and he will give this speech, "The Progressive Cause is Greater Than Any Individual," by Teddy Roosevelt. It's like an hour-long speech, and he gave it while he has a bullet lodged in his chest. So you have the election of Wilson, 1912. Wilson, he defeats Teddy Roosevelt, William Taft, and Eugene Debs. Taft's 1912 State of the Union. The 16th Amendment is ratified, which allows for income tax. And then you have women's suffrage procession in D.C. Alice Paul organized a women's suffrage procession in D.C. a day before Wilson's inauguration. The parade drew thousands and was met with violent harassment, which gained the movement national attention. So this will conclude this chapter, New Nationalism, chapter 16. And tomorrow will be the first chapter of the World Wars era, and we will be beginning with Woodrow Wilson's administration. The first chapter of the World Wars era will be World War I, and it covers the full Wilson administration from 1913 all the way to 1921. So all 8 years of the Wilson administration. So I hope you learned something new of our old history. And just so you know, what I've been showing you is our website. Our website is www.tarpeia.us. Tarpeia is spelled Tarpeia. And this is the compendium. And this is specifically chapter 16 of the compendium, which our compendium is this online library in the format of interactive timelines, like what you see here. So we have all the primary source documents, like, for example, McKinley's first inaugural address. We have the full text of that document on the timeline, and a bunch of other documents as well. And so if you're interested in looking through our compendium, looking at primary source documents, or just wanting to look through the timelines and learn something that you didn't know before, just go to our website. And just so you know, we are an educational nonprofit, a 501c3, so all donations are tax deductible. If you want to give a large contribution, like through a donor advised fund, then you can email me at mark@tarpeia.us, Mark with a K at Tarpeia, Tarpeia.us, and I can give you information like our charity's EIN and our address if you want to give a large contribution from a donor advised fund. So thank you for being here if you were here, and I hope to see you and more people tomorrow. Not tomorrow, the next day. So on Sunday, I'll be doing a live stream, which will be um, the first chapter of the World Wars era, which is the Wilson administration. So thank you, and I hope you have a nice day.